factory whose towering symbols already overshadow the village, whose rumbling machinery blots out the sounds of rural life. In living memory, though, this was a thriving community. It had a factory turning out barrels and a knitting mill. Both are now crumbling away. Its cottages are falling down, and even at Fradham, which is just 2 miles away, they haven't heard of Retew. But the death of a village is a personal thing to the people who live there. People like Mrs. George Martin, who's lived here for 45 years. How sad are you that the old village is going?
Very sad indeed.
In what particular way?
Well, we call it home. We don't want any other home, but we have to go, you see.
How will you find it settling down somewhere else?
I think we shall find it very hard. Very hard indeed.
Mrs. Shirley Whitford has only lived here for 10 years, but she also feels very strongly about the village going.
Yes, I do. I feel rather sad because although we've only lived here for 10 years, it is home to us. And, you know, when the sun is shining, it's such a lovely day down here, and you think, well, it's such a nice little place that you don't really want to leave down here.
Surely moving will have some advantages, though, for you.
I think it will for the children more than for myself, because, of course, we have the car, that it isn't too bad living here, but for the children, for the schools and youth clubs and things that they like to join, there isn't very much for them here, you see.
Of the various things that you've found here in the last 10 years, what will you miss most when the village dies?
I think my next-door neighbour.
And anything else?
And Mrs. Martin, because everyone turns to her. If anyone wants anything, it's always Mrs. Martin.
Well, as you can see, it did happen. The village of Retew, all gone, and all that remains, 2 monkey puzzle trees. And all that great friendship and that sense of neighbourliness. I wonder if that survived the move. I bet it did, because it is in our villages and small towns that sense of closeness, that warmth, that sense of community is at its strongest. And for tonight's programme, I thought I'd show you material which demonstrates just that. So let's look back, shall we, at some of our villages as they were at a quarter of a century ago, and how people lived and what they did as a community. And let's not forget how beautiful those places were, and still are.
This scene you're looking at epitomizes what I think nearly everybody imagines they will find when they come to visit Dartmoor. It's a typical Dartmoor scene, and it really is absolutely beautiful. People come to visit Dartmoor in the summer, and the place they come to more than anywhere else is here. This is Buckland in the Moor. I'm stood actually on a bank in the churchyard. Over there to my right is the church of St. Peter's, Buckland in the Moor. It's rather a charming church. It has a south wall of the nave and the font, which were built way back in the 12th century. The chancel is 13th century, and it has a 14th century medieval screen and a very charming tiled floor, which is under the belfry. It also has, as you can very probably see, a rather unique church clock. Instead of having numerals, the clock has a message, and it says, "My dear mother." And the village itself of Buckland in the Moor must be one of the most photographed villages in the country as well. It's appeared on calendars, it's on postcards, people come here to paint it, there's sketches of it. People never stop coming here for that reason. At the moment, it's a very quiet moorland village. But you come here in the summer, and it really can be just like Piccadilly Circus. Down the road, you'll find one of the reasons why people come here in such large numbers. Glorious thatch roof cottages with a little stream running in between, with the water tumbling down through the rocks. And here you'll find actually coach parties, all sitting, some sketching, some just looking at what is every Englishman's dream of his country home.
Centuries ago, most roads through Somerset led to the market town of Somerton. The 20th century have seen quieter times, but things are changing slowly. To preserve the enchantment, the County Council decided to make Somerton the subject of a conservation order. Buildings of special architectural or historic interest will be safeguarded for all time, and in future, any modern development will have to fit closely into the character of the immediate surroundings.
The villagers of Polint in Cornwall are feeling pleased with themselves. The village, which is near Looe and Polperro, has been adjudged the tidiest in the county, and a new village hall costing £4,000 has been opened. All the villagers have cooperated in keeping the village tidy, and their efforts brought them 93% in the competition. And to let everyone know, a commemorative plaque was put up on the village green.
This is the River Tamar. Now, up here at Bridge Rule, it isn't very wide. It's about 12 or 14 feet across, but it is wide enough to split a community in half. And that was the great problem facing this community with the original proposals of the Boundary Commission, who wanted the River Tamar to provide the boundary between Devon and Cornwall. Bridge Rule is halfway across the river. In East Bridge Rule, and that would be in Devon, they've got the school, the church, the chapel, and a couple of houses. But up the road in West Bridge Rule, all the people live together with the village post office and the pub and the parish hall. Now, this in itself is quite a problem, but it's aggravated by this suggested boundary. For instance, children living in West Bridge Rule in Cornwall would have to go 7 miles to the nearest school, although their own village school is just across the bridge. There would be 2 village policemen. Letters posted in one side of the river would be West Bridge Rule, Launceston, Cornwall, and 100 yards across the river it would be East Bridge Rule, Holsworthy, Devon. People going to church would have to cross a county boundary. The problem was a great one, but the people of Bridge Rule thought that legislation shouldn't be allowed to kill their community life. And so they took the law into their own hands and sent a deputation to try and save the community life of their village. And with the draft proposals of the Boundary Commission, it looks as if they've won the day. In what would have been Cornwall, I spoke to a member of the Rural Council, Mr. Norman Stansbury. Mr. Stansbury, why was it so important to you to keep Bridge Rule in Devon?
Well, firstly, we didn't want our village split, which would have happened. Our church would have been in Devon. Our new parish hall, which all the community have helped to build, would have gone to Cornwall, and we didn't want that to happen at all.
One thing that they do worry about here in Bridge Rule is that something might happen that would interrupt their community life, because community life is one of their great inspirations. For instance, this business of a parish hall. There are only 300 people here, and yet between them they raised enough money to equip it as one of the best halls in Devon, including town halls, and they've kept it free of debt, and they use it most of the time. Now, this business of disrupting community life was one of the main points made by the deputation of local people when they went to see the Boundaries Commission. I asked Mr. Andrew if the partition of the village would have stopped the people of East Bridge Rule using the parish hall, which, after all, they helped pay for.
Oh, no, definitely not. But, on the other hand, there would be a different feeling. That we were in Cornwall, and they were in Devon, and we are proud to be in Devon.
At Colliford in East Devon, Councillor Geoffrey Shand led a party who spent 2 hours beating the bounds. They needed good legs and lungs, for they had an 8-mile walk across fields and rivers, over hedges and walls. Local children are encouraged to join in, and apart from the enjoyment of the fresh air and the knowledge that it's a 600-year-old custom, there's a solid reward of tea and cakes at the end. Now to Somerset, where it's been voting day in the village of Cainton Mandeville. But the 337 inhabitants weren't choosing a new MP. The polling day was to settle an argument over whether or not the village should have street lighting, and there was a good turnout. A polling station was set up in the local school, and well over half the villagers voted. The final count decided that at last, Cainton Mandeville is to get its lighting. 111 voted for, and 73 voted against.
A West Countryman has hit upon a new idea in the well-worn technique of raising money. This is what the money is needed for, the parish church at East Anstey in North Devon. It will cost £500 to install electric light and heating. Mr. Victor Bonham Carter had the idea of asking local people to give antiques for a sale which started today. Buyers were soon trying to make up their minds on how much to bid. So many antiques were given that within 2 hours, nearly half the target was reached, and the sale continues tomorrow. So there's time yet for him to make up his mind.
A common complaint these days by young people living in rural areas is there's never anything for them to do with their spare time, and so the drift from the land goes on. Some country towns and villages are making big efforts to stop this flow of youngsters to the bigger towns and centres of entertainment. This is Burrington, a small village lying just west of the main Exeter to Barnstable road. The population is just over 500, and agriculture is the principal industry. And this hall is the focal point for entertainment in the village. It houses the Crusader Youth Club, and it caters for the 12 to 16-year-olds. All interests are catered for. After table tennis, the room's cleared for the drivers. There's a large following for the art of judo. This is one of the courses organised for the club by the South Molton Further Education Centre. It's a sport that's becoming popular with boys and girls, and 2 of the instructors are in fact girls from Barnstable. The club, however, is not merely recreational. For the girls, there are lessons in knitting, sewing and needlecraft. While the club is providing these facilities for the young folk, it is also trying to bridge the gap between church and young people. At present, quizzes and discussions are taking place between members and the club organisers. The club chairman is the Reverend Norman Davey, Vicar of Burrington, and the leaders are 2 local people, Mr. Brian Fraser-Smith and Miss Shirley Watkins. In the meantime, however, the wide variety of activities continue, like this charm course for the girls. Experts visit the club from Barnstable and other neighbouring towns to show the teenagers all the tricks of the cosmetic trade. With the shorter working week and more leisure time generally coming in the future, many small towns and villages face a difficult, challenging task in providing facilities and amenities to keep the community spirit alive. The parish of Burrington would seem to have anticipated the challenge and to have met it successfully.
A village called Tatworth, a meadow full of watercress, and a candle auction. And, believe it or not, it all makes sense. The story starts here in Stowell Mead, famous for its grass keep and watercress. It's near the village of Tatworth, just outside Chard in Somerset, and once a year, members of Stowell Court go along to a local inn for a secret ceremony. The idea of it all is to decide who shall become tenant of the meadow for the next 12 months, and the auction continues until the candle goes out. This year, for the first time, a woman, Miss Aubrey Haynes, became a member of the court when she bought certain local property. The final bid was made by the chairman, Mr. Lusty Brewer, who now becomes tenant of the meadow.
Well, welcome back. Well, much, of course, has changed in our villages over the last 20 years, but a lot has remained the same. But perhaps above all, the concern voiced about the future of our villages then still worries us today.
On the map, Hulstown, part of the borough of St Ives, is just a tiny dot. And from up here on the hillside, it doesn't look much either. But like many little places in the West Country, Hulstown has a story to tell. It was built by James House, a former mayor of St Ives, in the early part of the last century to house miners when this was one of the biggest tin-producing areas in Cornwall. It's said that House did this to secure himself a seat in Parliament. He built a town and filled it with people who naturally voted for their benefactor.
Here he planned what he thought was a model village. A village where people had spacious gardens, solid granite walls, and as well as that, he had his houses built on a semi-detached plan so that people could be really neighbourly and should help each other in times of trouble. All this was his vision.
But with the decline of the tin mining industry, the village began to decay. It became a target for small-time property investors, and many of the cottage sites changed hands for between 50 and £100. Most of the remaining cottages have been condemned by St Ives Council. The inhabitants, some of whom were born here and lived here all their lives, have been moved into council homes in St. Ives.
They're trying to force me out.
How long have you been here, Mrs. Hampton?
We've been here 30 years now.
You're a local lady, are you?
Yes, I am, yes.
The public inspector came out here on Monday, and he told us we had to get out. That the prison wasn't prepared to put anything about the house for us.
The reason for this, you think, would be the cost?
The cost, yes.
Yes. What would happen to this place if you did move out?
Well, if we moved out, this place would be modernised and sold.
On rentals as low as this, a landlord is not over-anxious to spend money on maintenance and repairs. Many people here have never had the luxury of a mains water supply, let alone an indoor flush toilet. And as times change, many of these old Cornish cottages simply don't measure up to modern housing standards. So the council moves in and condemns them, or instructs the landlord to carry out certain improvements. The tenants are obliged to leave the cottages, which are then done up and either sold or relet at a very much bigger rental.
The people who live here love Holstown. They're devoted to Holstown. There's a great spirit amongst them, a great camaraderie, always has been.
Of the West Country's growing number of ghost villages, so called because each year there's a growing number of temporary residents, wealthy people from up country that can afford to come here and pay inflated prices for cottage properties. They call them holiday homes. They stay here for maybe a month out of the 12. For the rest of the time they lie empty and idle, or they're filled with other strangers. There's a growing feeling that the very heart of village life is being threatened in the quaint coastal communities of the southwest. It's a subject that's causing many people concern, local authorities included. But those most worried by the situation are those living in the village 12 months of the year. Mrs. Hurrell, why are you so much against these part-time villagers?
Well, I'm so much against these part-time villagers because I don't consider that they do bring an awful lot to the village.
But surely they bring their money, and you're quite happy to have that.
Well, do they bring their money? That is a point. I don't consider that they do bring very much. For one thing, it's about 4 months in the year at the most that these cottages are fully occupied. But I'm so much against the people who buy the cottages up, very often at highly inflated prices.
Yeah. Well, when you say highly inflated, can you tell us what sort of terms you're talking in?
Well, take, for instance, a cottage a stone's throw from where we're standing now.
Mm-hmm.
It came on the market last year. It has no inside lavatory, no bathroom, no hot and cold water, no hot water system. And the selling price was £5,100. Well, I consider this is highly inflated. It just doesn't give the local people, if they want to buy these properties, a chance. They cannot compete with these prices.
I think it's the young people that suffer most from the situation. They live in a low-income area, and they just can't compete with the fancy prices that the city dwellers can afford. Pat Yeomans and her fiancé have been house hunting in Hope Cove for 18 months.
Firstly, if you want to rent anything, people aren't really interested because all they want to do is summer letting. And if they are willing to let, it's about 4 months of the year.
And you'd be living like tramps, really? Like
well,
gypsies.
you know, yes, that's right, because as soon as you get settled, you've got to move on again. On the other hand, if you're prepared to buy, you can raise about £3,500 to 4, but the cottages and things make far more than this. You know, people from the Midlands come and they buy them up at about £450,000, £5,000, and you just can't compete with them.
Are you going to be forced to leave the village where you've lived your entire life?
Oh yes, we're giving up Hope now altogether.
Many people in Hope Cove can remember when life was very different from the seasonal cut and thrust of a tourist centre. But it was Hope Cove as a fishing village that produced characters like 79-year-old Roland Argett, the oldest inhabitant. He's certainly seen some changes.
Village life isn't like it used to be, not in my younger days. No, not at all.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know. They don't seem to the community here that was then, you know what I mean to say, it was years back, and you were all one in the village then. But now it's changed altogether.
Cliffany Hill, as pretty a hamlet as you'll find anywhere in Cornwall. 5 years ago, it was a derelict mess. The transformation has been the work of one family, a family of 5, the Slaughter family, refugees from the commercial hurly-burly of Essex, and with their own hands they've worked this conversion. As you look around, although the place sparkles with new paint, there are no jarring reminders of the 20th century, apart from the addition of the odd electricity cable here and there. And this atmosphere has been retained on purpose. Mr. Salter, how come you're in sole possession of a hamlet?
Well, this is really what we were looking for. We searched pretty well Cornwall, Devon, part of Somerset, to find somewhere where we could have holiday cottages. We looked at farms with derelict barns, or we looked at derelict cottages, or groups on the edges of village, something like this, where we could have 4 or 5 cottages. Without this, we knew we couldn't make a living. And we happened to light upon this. And the moment we did so, all the car doors opened and the children jumped out, and I think all 4 of us said the same thing at the same moment. This is exactly the ruin we've been looking for. We were pretty well sure right from that moment that this was what we were looking for. So we, first of all, did the 2 cottages that had been lived in, and when we'd got them looking nice, and we were fortunate, we got a compliment from the local paper. I don't know who put it in, but somebody did, and this probably helped. And then we could have the planning people down and say, well, look, this is what we've done with a horrible eyesore, a mess and a ruin. Can we now do it with the rest of the ruin? Because it was one of the worst-looking farms and shambles of buildings for miles around. There's quite a lot of them in Cornwall.
What sort of premises have you got here?
Well, we've 5 cottages and our own farmhouse. They're completed, or near enough completed, and we've planning permission for 2 more.
You must have a remarkably hardy family.
Oh, they're very tough. They're very adaptable, thank goodness. They've enjoyed 99% of it anyway.
National Laughter Week is the idea of the comedian Ken Dodd, so where better to find national laughter could one come than to the Cornish hamlet of Doddy Cross, about 2.5 miles off the main road between Plymouth and Liscard. Will you be laughing more than usual during National Laughter Week?
I hope so, anyway.
What will you do to make yourself laugh more than usual?
Try to make myself happy, I suppose.
And how will you do it?
Oh, lots of little things. I've got a little girl, and she makes me laugh lots of times.
Are you determined to do your part to make National Laughter Week a great success?
I've done that all my life.
Is it patriotic to laugh, though?
I think so. It helps you over a lot of troubles, isn't it?
What will be your recipe for getting a laugh a minute during National Laughter Week?
My recipe? Do all the housework for the wife for a week.
Would you laugh for me, please?
I can't laugh for nothing.
You're laughing very well now. Would you laugh a little bit more, please?
Any good?
Beautiful.
Oh, yes, it is the spirit, the sense of humour that have kept our communities alive, and long may they do so. Well, our show is almost over, but before we leave, let's return briefly to the village of Retew, the village that was, and the people enjoying themselves before it all came to an end.
So now, for the benefit of the children, the clay firms are moving the families out. And this carnival is the last time that the children of Retew will ever parade on their own village green.